Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
We're cooking up something a little different for the AFC East preview today. It's pretty shocking, but for the first time in about 700 episodes of Bet the Board, I have the luxury of being in the host chair for a football show, asking the questions. They're not going to be hard-hitting, but I get to ask them. And the man joining me, most of you are familiar with by now. He's a pro bettor. It's all he does. He's made you guys money over the years through the written word. He's filled in for us a handful of times on this podcast, and his role is actually going to expand this season, helping us break down Monday Night Football each and every single week. This gentleman goes by the Twitter handle of Watt_05. Be sure to give him a follow. Billy, how goes it, my man?
Goes it, man. Hey, happy to be on. Always grateful for the invite and pumped to talk some NFL football again. Specifically the AFC East. I think it's a fascinating and competitive division among those top three teams. So can't wait to get into it. And again, always appreciate the platform, bud.
Yeah, anytime. I mean, we talk back and forth via text, and I think we just recently spoke on the phone. So it's good to actually get some of our thoughts out there for the folks. And listen, I thought this was the perfect time to bring you into the fold for a preseason preview. I think we always talk about, starting points for bettors wanting to take that next step being specialization, whether it's a particular conference in college or division in the NFL or region of the country you live, so your access to information is better. And I think when we talk about this, right, you being a professional bettor, certainly your opinions are unbiased, but the dynamic at play today is, you are a Buffalo Bills fan. You're kind of in that area, and I think the Bills are a perfect place to start this conversation. So we might as well rip off the Band-Aid before we deep dive each side of the ball. We know the Bills total took under money this offseason. The gap in the AFC East division has shrunk between the Bills and the Jets, who are now co-favorites, plus 180 most places. Winning the division is the easiest path to the playoffs. Is the championship window still open for the Buffalo Bills?
So I think in the spring and the summer, the mindset, you mentioned it from sharp bettors, was Buffalo was going to be a decent fade team this year. And I'm sure those groups and individual professional bettors still feel that case. We saw the win total open up. It took some sharp money, but I thought the openers from the market-making books were pretty solid around that 10.2 mark. And the movement's been minimal since that opening buy on the under. As we get into camp and start reading reports and hearing from teams, players, and coaches, I think there does seem to be a tick up in positivity and potentially a looser feel around this team. More fun and excitement with these young guys about where Buffalo could be headed. We're going to get into it. The strength of schedule is an absolute bear, which is why more glass half empty feel in the market on the Bills. You mentioned and asked if the Super Bowl window is still open. And while there is pressure on McDermott, rightfully so, he was willing to change his stripes a little bit in that second half of the year last year. Mitch Morse, who's no longer with the team, talked about it post that Philadelphia Eagles game where he said McDermott basically went into the locker room and told the guys he wanted them to play free. He was not going to punish them for mistakes. He let them run Allen more. He kind of took the governor off the team. So the reason I say all that is Buffalo ended the season winning six wins before running into Kansas City. And if people heard me on this podcast, I was definitely more pessimistic with the culture last year than I am now. I'm a little more optimistic. The team rallied around McDermott after that article came out, basically bashing him up and down. But all that being said, I think at this juncture there's a ceiling to the success Buffalo can have with McDermott in the AFC specifically. While Mahomes, Reed, and Spags are still in Kansas City, and the staffs and the talent in Baltimore, Houston, and Cincinnati continue to grow, I think McDermott's a very good high floor coach. I think his teams you're going to get the most out of his teams from that perspective, but we cannot ignore the struggles versus the elites in the playoffs. And is the Super Bowl window open? I think it is, but a lot has to go right this year for this team to A, get over the win total, and B, make a deep run in the playoffs, especially when it comes to injury luck.
You mentioned Josh Allen there playing a little bit more free. He's certainly the straw that stirs the drink. He finished second among qualifying quarterbacks in total EPA generated last season. His legs constantly keep defenses on their heels, and we got to see that element of his game a little bit more later in the season. I think if you had a gripe, it would be the 23 turnover-worthy plays. The pass-catching group looks a little different. You hinted at that. Stephon Diggs traded to Houston. Gabe Davis signs with Jacksonville. You're going to have an elevated role for Khalil Shakur. You have added pressure on Dalton Kincaid to make that year 2 leap. The Bills go out and draft Keon Coleman with pick 33, clearly become a fan favorite of Bills Mafia, an elite contested catch receiver, and then Brandon Beane adds 2 veterans to the room with MVS and Curtis Samuel. They have, I would say, unique traits. Offensive line has 5 familiar faces, so cohesion should be strong. James Cook, one of the more versatile backs in the league. And I think we're in lockstep here, where what's on paper doesn't look as bleak as the national narrative. But you mentioned Buffalo's schedule being daunted, projected to face the most difficult slate of defenses in the NFL. Billy, if you had to pinpoint some of the biggest factors for the Bills' offense this upcoming season, what would they be?
Let's start with the offensive line. I want to see what the drop-off is from Mitch Morse to Connor McGovern. There have been some snap issues. I think that Morse was while he didn't play top-tier football at the end of his time with Buffalo, he's still an average center, and that's really all we needed to be. The good thing about Buffalo, and it doesn't get talked a lot about with Josh, is his ability to escape sacks is one of his most underrated skill sets. Buffalo only allowed 24 sacks last year, and they had a 30 sack margin differential between offense and defense. So his ability, if the O-line's an average O-line, he's proven that he can get out of the pocket, make moves, still make plus EV plays when he's got the ball in his hands. As for the weapons, I am very high on Khalil Shakir. Been high on him for a couple years. Love Kincaid as well. Those should be the 2 workhorses for Buffalo through the pass game. You know more about Keon Coleman than myself, but he's looking good in practice, and that's a good thing, especially when you consider Buffalo's cornerback room, which is very deep. So it's not like Keon Coleman. It's not like we might have a Malik Neighbors situation where for the Giants, Malik Neighbors is just cooking their cornerbacks, but we're not sure how good the cornerbacks are. We know Buffalo has some solid cornerbacks, and Keon is still showing out. I think with Joe Brady and the play calling, we're going to see more 2 tight end sets with Knox. They just paid him. He's got 3-year, $29.5 million contract, and the numbers show a clear advantage in the pass game for Buffalo with Knox and Kincaid out there. They had a 57% success rate in the red zone with both of them out. I think we're also going to see more play action from Allen. He had 10.2 yards per attempt with play action compared to 6.9 without. I really do think that this big drop, like you mentioned the national media here, the big drop in the unit grades for the wide receiver and pass catchers in Buffalo is overblown. I think Brady's going to get the most he can out of Curtis Samuel, who had his best year with Joe Brady. And if Keon can be like a 650 to 750 yard guy with 4 touchdowns, I think that's good enough that the Bills probably not going to be a top 5 offense, but certainly should be a top 10, especially when you consider they have Josh Allen's anywhere from 2 to 4 in the league in terms of his overall talent and ability at quarterback. Cooks is amazing. He's great. He's a bright spot. We need him to have a little bit better hands in the pass-catching realm, but I think if he improves in that area, he provides that dual threat that Buffalo's been missing from that position. but they do play the toughest strength of schedule for an offense this season, and that is brutal. So they can't afford injuries. They've been very healthy on that side of the ball, especially at the O-line the past couple of years. So they really have to keep that going, I think, this year in order to have sustained success.
Yeah, I was thinking about the Bills' offense this morning, and I liken it to the sports card space or other markets. Over the last few years, the best assets have really become obvious, and smart people have started to consolidate. They're going deeper in the best stuff and not spraying the board and going broad. And the Bills' offense, at least from a skill position perspective, feels broad right now, right? James Cook is a plus back, but is he a superstar? We all love Dalton Kincaid. Is he ready to become a go-to guy? You mentioned Khalil Shakur was fantastic down the stretch, but what is he with more defensive attention? Curtis Samuel coming off one of his best seasons. Keon Coleman, fringe first-round pick. You mentioned him showing out. He did it again, I believe, yesterday, making a slew of contested catches. MVS has speed for days. But which one of these guys is keeping a defensive coordinator up at night? Which one requires added attention to where it helps the rest of the weapons because they're seeing little attention? And I think having a collection of good talent works for an elite offensive mind. You mentioned some of them a little bit earlier, and Andy Reid. Is Joe Brady that yet? And you did mention McDermott taking the governor off the offense, but we saw it a little bit back in that Kansas City game where it just felt like, hey, we're not really being overly explosive here. Everything becomes check down Charlie. We're relying on the defense. So I worry about that a little bit. McDermott, though, you mentioned him. I think he's probably the perfect segue to the other side of the ball. You and I know at this point, offense equates to winning far more than defense, even if Sean McDermott doesn't believe it. Fortunately, the Bills' defense should have better injury luck this season. It was bottom 10 in the league in adjusted games lost to injury. The heart and soul, as you know, Matt Milano played just 5 games. Daquan Jones only 7. Those 2 injuries left a massive void in the middle of the Bills' defense, and it led to Buffalo finishing 29th an explosive run defense. Von Miller looked like a shell of himself, trying to come back from a knee injury too soon. And this year brings some change. Josh Allen's cap number increased by $12 million year over year. Another $30 million increase takes shape ahead of the 2025 season. So you start to look, Buffalo couldn't keep its most efficient defender in Terrell Dotson. You would know better than me if he's that good. Also gone are the dynamic duo Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde. At the same time, a schedule increase in difficulty is coming from one of the 5 easiest last season to a projected schedule just outside the top 10. There's still uncertainty whether McDermott or his newly promoted defensive coordinator, Bob Babich, is calling plays. What's your take on the Bills' defense heading into 2024, and maybe what needs to happen specifically for McDermott to field another top 5 defense again?
Yeah, you mentioned it. I think a good place to start is what happened last year, just briefly. Losing over a 2-week span, Tre'Davious White, Matt Milano, and Daquan Jones. You could argue those guys were the best at their positions at that time on that defense. So that was a massive loss. You mentioned Von. Should have never came back when he did. He's even admitted that this year, that he came back way too early. And then you looked at Gregory Rousseau and Ed Oliver missed 5 games combined. Poyer and Hyde at safety missed 3 games combined. So the linebacker core was decimated versus Kansas City, and that game came on a short week. So there was definitely a lot of injury concerns last year. Now moving forward to this year, defensive line, I love. I think Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones are extremely solid in the middle of that defensive line. Oliver finished 14th in pass rush win rate and 5th in run stop win rate among defensive tackles, also with 9.5 sacks. Von Miller's pressure rate in 22 was 15.7%, but he's going on 35. He's off an ACL tear, so we're not really sure what to expect. I like Gregory Rousseau a lot this year. I think he's going to have a big year. I think his sack number is definitely depressed. 2 years ago, his number was 7.5 or 8 for sacks. This year, it's down to 5.5, and he should have a bigger role. Milano and Bernard at linebacker is more than fine. And losing, you mentioned Dodson. He's over in Seattle with McDonald. Losing Dodson's a decent-sized deal, but if Milano and Bernard are going to stay healthy throughout the year, I think we're fine. The strength of the defense, really, to me, is the cornerback room. Rasul Douglas had a great year coming over from Green Bay, fit in with Buffalo great. Teron Johnson just got edged out by Trent McDuffie in Kansas City for first-team All-Pro in the slot. And Christian Benford and Kyrie Elam been battling for that number 2 spot. Kyrie Elam is finally finding his footing with this defense and the level of play it's going to take to compete. So I think our cornerback room is A-okay. The problem is the safety position. And I don't know if I was up early, I was looking at some of the quotes, but the DC Babich even said today, his exact quote was, "We're going to put a lot on Taylor Rapp this year. All of our safeties will have a lot on their plate, but we still have a lot of work to do." Taylor Rapp being your go-to safety is terrifying, especially when you're coming from 2 vets who were probably a little past their prime, but the chemistry between Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde was unbelievable, and they were still a very, very efficient players at those positions. We brought in Mike Edwards from Kansas City, who's honestly graded out as average safety. He's not even practicing right now. He's week to week with an injury. Cole Bishop, the rookie out of Utah, shoulder injury. He's week to week. So we have DeMar Hamlin back there right now with Taylor Rapp getting a lot of first-team reps. That's terrifying. And you mentioned that the schedule is going to go up in terms of quality of quarterbacks we're going to be facing. I actually think Buffalo's defense could be just as good as last year, but it may not look that way because of the strength of schedule we're going to face. They played 9 very poor quarterbacks last year, and only one of those 9 is still starting. That's Russ Wilson. It's going to get a lot tougher this season. It's a top 10 schedule of opposing quarterbacks. McDermott tends to get the most out of his guys, especially in the secondary, so I'm interested to see how that's going to work with the safety position, but that is where the concern is if we can't get pressure quickly. The cornerbacks are good enough to hold up for a little bit, but down the field, how many breaks are there going to be? How many deep breaks are there going to be? And we're playing, I'm honestly, Payne, I'm looking at week 1, going up against Kyler Murray and some of those speedsters they have on that team, and we've seen that number go from 7 to 6.5. It's a little concerning.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting defense because you're reading all of the camp reports, and the defensive line seems to be the best unit on the field. Is everything that I'm reading? It's
yep.
Is it the offensive line? Is it the defensive line? I think Von Miller's production can only go in one direction. You mentioned it: 3 quarterback hits on 179 pass rush snaps last season, 40% missed tackle rate. He sounds like he's playing a little bit better. Tre'Davious White is a well-known name for sure, but he's played like 400-ish snaps the last 2 seasons. And Rasul Douglas, you hit it perfectly. I think he's a great scheme fit. Greg Russo, AJ Epinesa made huge leaps simultaneous last season. I think, were well ahead of the market on Duke's defense at the college level. Its key contributor, Dwayne Carter, he's shown out in camp, providing a great depth piece behind Daquan Jones and Ed Oliver. The Bills' defensive line just, to me, it looks pretty good here on paper, and everything I'm hearing is great. But that safety position, significant concern. It's effectively Taylor Rapp, who has some weaknesses, and then what else? Cole Bishop, Mike Edwards dealing with injuries. If Von Miller doesn't return to form, maybe the depth on the edge could be a little bit of a problem. You have Smoot. He's returning from an Achilles tear. But I just think the schedule is so difficult, and I have a hard time, trusting McDermott to keep his paws off the offense in the biggest games. That I think we're in lockstep here. Buffalo feels like a really high-floor team, but we're still waiting for them to get over the hump. I think that's probably the fairest assessment at this point.
I think 100%. Like it would be if Josh Allen stays healthy throughout the year. I just cannot see this team ever being like below 7 or 8 wins. But can they be a 13-win team this year with the step up from the Dolphins, the Jets, and the schedule difficulty? I can't see that either. I'm right in line with the market though. I don't show any value going under or over at this point. I understand the under money early, especially with the question of we didn't know how Keon Coleman would look. Because if Keon Coleman is not that dude when they get the pads on week 1 and he's struggling to separate and the contested catches aren't happening, this offense is probably going to struggle a bit. Even with, I think you mentioned at the beginning when we were talking about the offense, who's that guy who's going to keep opponents' defensive coordinators up? I think Kincaid can be that guy. I really do.
Yep.
But is that going to be, he's not Travis Kelce. So is that enough? Is that enough to get Buffalo, who might have a defense that's top 10 in efficiency but not top 5 or 6? Is that enough to get them to 11 wins? That's the ultimate question.
To a team with a head coach we want having his paws all over the offense. It's the lone AFC East team residing in the South in the Miami Dolphins, led by, I think, what we believe is an offensive mastermind in Mike McDaniel.
Wizard.
4th best offense in 2022 by our metrics, 3rd best last season. McDaniel just made so many improvements from year 1 to year 2. At this point, we know Tua is polarizing because the efficiency metrics are far superior to his talent. I think that's another sign that McDaniel's offense and the surrounding talent elevate Tua's play and not the inverse. Nevertheless, Miami paid Tua. Camp reports are suggesting Tua is more comfortable in year 3 of the offense. He's throwing with greater velocity. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle both got extensions. They're happy. OBJ joins on a team-friendly deal full of incentives. Something the Dolphins lacked last season was competent tight end play. In comes Jonnu Smith, 3 years removed from a $50 million deal. It feels like Miami got him on the cheap. He's still 28 and in his prime. Miami has speed for days at running back with A-Chain, Mostert, and now Jalen Wright. Still questions along Miami's offensive line, specifically at guard. But, Billy, I'm going to peel back the curtain here. 3 different times this offseason, you've sent me an information-seeking text regarding Miami. You've been taught well not to tip your hand, but now's the time. I'm as interested as our listeners are to hear your thoughts on the Dolphins, and let's start with McDaniel's calling card offense.
Yeah, so Tua gets the big contract, which is great. Obviously, Dallas could take some notes on how to handle that situation, getting that done before the season and taking care of Tyreek too. You mentioned McDaniel. He's an absolute wizard. Miami finished top 3 in 8 of the most critical offensive metrics. The only thing that needs to improve really with this team was that the pass offense seemed to be a little bit better in the red zone. Tua was 40th in EPA per attempt and 33rd in success rate out of qualifying quarterbacks in the red zone. The one real change we saw McDaniel make was the release time. So he went from 14th to last year. He became the 2nd quickest release time in the NFL last year, and that's when Miami's at its best. They got behind the chains a little bit last year. They had the 6th longest yards to go for on 3rd down, but they had the 7th best at converting those. I think a lot of that has to do with McDaniel and just how brilliant he is. There's a chance that regresses this year in terms of how good can they be on 3rd downs, but I also don't think they're going to be putting themselves in a position to be 6th longest to go, especially with an O-line that he knows he's going to have to get the ball out quick. You mentioned it. It was the 4th most injured unit in the NFL last year. Hopefully they get some positive injury luck this year. But most of the beat writers do feel this is the weakest unit on the team, especially you mentioned the guards, a lot of interior O-line. We've seen that there have been some snap issues that's caused McDaniel to get quite upset at practice, which is not really his personality. But Aaron Brewer comes over from Tennessee, kind of an average center. I think he's a little bit better than what the metrics say he is, but they got to get that straightened out. They've said it's been to the point where it's causing disruption in practice, some of these bad snaps. So obviously, look, it's early August. They're going to get this figured out. It's just losing Robert Hunt to Carolina. We're going to see how that plays out. And then obviously Miami's just a much different team when Teron Armstead is healthy, and he has a problem staying healthy. But if he is healthy, this unit can be an average unit to a little bit better than average, which is huge for where they want to go. As for the weapons, when is Raheem Mostert going to fall off? He's 32 years old now. He does get banged up a bit, but he's been extremely efficient. I do really like the Jalen Wright kid out of Tennessee. And Devon A-Chain actually talked about how this kid's ahead of where I was last year. He's in the playbook all the time. He is showing that he can learn an offense. And are we going to see more outside zone runs, even more than he did last year? It seemed like McDaniel midway through the season realized these outside zone runs were where the success was coming from in the rush game, and he pushed it in the back end of the season. So will we see more outside zone rushes with the speed of A-Chain and maybe some Jalen Wright? You mentioned Jonnu Smith, I think is a huge pickup. They haven't had a tight end like that who can really block and move and catch as well as Jonnu can. So you mentioned getting him on the cheap. I think that's huge. And then the only other question I have for the offense is just, are we going to be able to see these two electric wide receivers stay healthy throughout the season? Because if we are, I think the sky's the limit. If Tyreek and Jalen Waddle can stay healthy throughout the entire course of the season, maybe miss 1 or 2 games, that would be huge for this team. But they consistently are crossing that middle. They get banged up. They take some of the bigger shots. That's my only concern here, though, Payne. I think the offense with McDaniel, now you're in your 3rd year, I think only good things ahead for this offense.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there's more skill, position, talent, and speed than anyone in the league here, and you have the elite offensive mind. But their ability to beat good teams and play the best in big moments will come down to the offensive line. And I think you hit it perfectly in that Teron Armstead is an all-world tackle, right? He's going to be a first-ballot Hall of Famer, but he's averaged just 10 games the last 3 seasons. Can he stay healthy? Isaiah Wynn is dealing with an injury. He would rectify some of those guard issues. What version of Aaron Brewer and Austin Jackson is Miami getting? Both are coming off their first seasons playing above replacement level. Robert Jones, undrafted 4th-year player, becoming a full-time starter for the first time at guard. Miami finished 31st in pass block win rate last season. That needs to improve because you mentioned some of Tua's metrics. That delta, pressure versus no pressure, is the size of the ocean. QB 41 out of 41 qualifiers in adjusted accuracy when Tua's pressured. QB 13 when kept clean. So on offense, there are some questions up front there. Defensively, Miami underachieved last year, I felt like. When you think about the star power, the defensive coordinator facing a bottom 5 schedule of offenses, to finish average in EPA per play allowed just wasn't good enough. So Mike McDaniel brings in Anthony Weaver, 3rd defensive coordinator in as many years. Weaver is pretty familiar in terms of national recognition, spent the last 3 seasons in Baltimore working specifically with that great defensive line, and I think that's the kind of defense Weaver wants to bring to Miami, more of an attacking style, 4 down front, single high coverage in the back. On paper, little to no worries in the Dolphins secondary. Jalen Ramsey, Kendall Fuller, Javon Holland, Jordan Poyer, and some solid depth. Linebacker group is solid, but where the questions lie are among the defensive line. Christian Wilkins and Van Ginkel leaving free agency. They're earning nearly $100 million in guaranteed money combined. Jalen Phillips tore his Achilles in late November. Bradley Chubb tore his ACL in January. Shaq Barrett, the shocking retirement 2 weeks ago. So how are we thinking about the Dolphins defense heading into the season, Billy, and does that front 4 have you concerned?
You mentioned the text messages I was sending you. I think all 3 of them revolved around what are they going to do at defensive end. We talked about, you mentioned Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips, and just how effective are these guys going to be even when they come back to playing? How effective are they? Those are 2, Achilles and ACL is just extremely difficult to come back from and be yourself in those first 12 months after you're past the recovery period and you can move. How effective are those 2 going to be? Because they're very good players, especially Jalen Phillips, but those are very difficult injuries to come back from. And a big part of their success was they finished plus 25 in sack margin last year with 56 sacks by the defense. They lost Van Ginkel. He's in Minnesota now. You mentioned him. Surprise retirement of Shaq Barrett. That was shocking. He's only 31 years old. It's put the edge rusher position in a really tough spot. Good news for them. Chop Robinson continues to impress as the camp goes on. He kind of started a little rough, a little shaky, which is what's expected out of a rookie, but he's been a plus run defender that all the camp reports are coming out too, and that's what's going to keep him on the field if he can stop the run. I see they heated up the leftovers with Emmanuel Ogbah. We'll see how that works out. Obviously, look, everything's positive in camp, and it seems like he's having some career resurgence. He's back to his 2021, 2020 season ways. It's the biggest question is the edge. I think, but you mentioned it, Payne, last year just underperforming under Fangio. They finished bottom 8 in red zone and 30 in end defense. You mentioned what Anthony Weaver wants to do. He wants this unit to have a bully mentality, and players have talked about wanting to have that same feel that the Ravens defense had last year where they're constantly attacking. He's got the secondary pieces to do that. He's got the guys in the secondary have that mentality when you talk about Jalen Ramsey and slot cornerback who, I don't know if you've heard this, but Ethan Bonner, Stanford kid from Texas, seems to be the talk of the camp. Everyone says this guy he's so fast, and he might be as fast as Tyreek. And Jalen Waddle says he's been one of the most improved corners. So you look at the safety room with Javon Holland and Jordan Poyer. I think Poyer still got a couple good years of football left, so that's an upgrade. Like the linebacking core a lot. I think it's kind of underrated with David Long, Jordan Brooks, and Anthony Walker Jr. He kind of had a tough go in Cleveland with his injuries. I think he's a much better player than people realize. He just hasn't been able to stay on the field. Interior defensive line, brought in Calais Campbell. I guess Tyir Tart wants to play football again. Seems like he's interested in that sport. And Zach Sealer, who 11.2% pressure rate, they're going to be the catalyst to filling that production left by Christian Wilkins. It's all going to come down to the edge, Payne. I think if their edge can't get the pressure they need, we're going to see Dolphins in shootouts all over again. Because as good as the secondary room is, if you don't get pressure, guys are going to get open in today's NFL. So I think the defense is going to improve. I think the defense can be great if we see Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips come back and be, even if it's just a slight tick down from what they were, if they can stay on the field, be healthy midway through the season, and perform and be productive even if they're not elite anymore, at least for this season, this could be a great defense. But I think coming out of the blocks, it's probably going to lead to maybe some shootouts if they can't get any pressure.
I think we're in lockstep there early, and the hope is Miami has a coordinator in Anthony Weaver who specializes in defensive line play. So can that skill set help Miami exceed the early season expectation? You mentioned Tyir Tart. Is he in shape? You would hope a guy playing on a one-year prove-it deal would be, and when he's his best, he is one of the elite run-stopping forces in this league. But really what triggered the Calais Campbell signing was seeing Tyir Tart finish dead last in every drill and puking all over the field. It sounds like he's been better in the last week to 10 days. You mentioned Calais Campbell and Zach Seiler inside. That's a nice three if everyone is working in unison there. Chop Robinson, you mentioned, has flashed in camp. We'll see if he can be a three-down edge when the lights come on. Emmanuel Ogbah was interesting, and you hinted at those past Dolphins seasons. He was signed last week after Shaq Barrett left, and he's going to be far better, I think, in Anthony Weaver's scheme, attacking downhill, which was the scheme that landed Ogbah his big deal after accumulating 127 pressures and 21 sacks in those back-to-back 2020-2021 seasons for Miami. So it's about surviving until Phillips and Chubb get reacclimated. Phillips is banging the table and says he wants to play week one. We'll see. Chubb had a career season going last year, 22% pass rush win rate, 70 pressures in total, 13 sacks, set the edge well, and he was versatile enough to drop into coverage. Miami's schedule is manageable once again. We're projecting a bottom 10 slate of offenses faced. Situational defense, you hit perfectly. I think there's some variance there year over year, and that's really where Miami struggled in 2023. Green and red zone areas, Miami ranked bottom 10. So can you get some positive fortunes there, some regression there? That would be huge for this defense. But speaking of defense, Billy, if you're good, we can transition to a team dealing with a even larger transition of their own in the New England Patriots.
Let's do it. We'll go right. We can go right into the offense if you want, and just go from there. But
yeah, I mean, I think this is interesting, right? Like, you have an owner in Robert Kraft who I would say respectfully and professionally allowed Bill Belichick to move on. There were some front office changes that were made with Elliott Wolf getting promoted from director of scouting to GM. I think anyone's an upgrade over the roster construction version of Bill Belichick, but I was a little surprised that Kraft didn't completely tear things down on the field, instead promoted Gerard Mayo to head coach. Mayo's been working in unison with Belichick since 2019, so to me he's been part of the problem. I think it's difficult to assume Mayo pulls all the same schematic strings as Belichick defensively, so you'd expect regression there. I thought Mayo bombed in his opening presser, but I want to start with the offense. We know Mayo hired Alex Van Pelt to be his OC. There are some mixed opinions there, right? Quarterbacks not named Deshaun Watson rave about Van Pelt. Some say Van Pelt was the glue to the Browns' offense, helping them overachieve at times the past few seasons when Cleveland had to overcome massive injury problems. Those same folks believe that Van Pelt became the fall guy for the Browns' ownership and front office for their horrific Deshaun Watson trade and subsequent contract extension to this point. We'll see who's ultimately right, but I think it's hard for Van Pelt to be worse than Matt Patricia and Bill O'Brien. Jacoby Brissett has a solid relationship with Van Pelt from their time together in Cleveland. It sounds like there's been progression in camp the past couple days, and the Patriots offense found a little bit of a groove. All signs point to the young guys having an opportunity in the receiving room. Juju is being phased out. Bourne still recovering from an ACL tear. But you have Jalen Polk, Demario Douglas, and Javon Baker seem to be the key guys alongside KJ Osborne and Hunter Henry. Ramondre Stevenson signed the big extension to remain in New England, as did Michael Onwenu. He's moving to right tackle full-time, but there's serious questions at the other three spots up front. Billy, when we kind of assess this offense and team in total right now, Pro Bettors went under 5.5 wins on New England. It's now 4.7. We've seen the division odds balloon to 28-1. What's your expectation for this new-look Patriots offense, knowing Van Pelt is calling plays, something he didn't do in Cleveland, and the schedule the Patriots have just does them no favors?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. You can only really go up from what we saw last year with Mac Jones and Billy O. All that, it can only go up, but it still looks extremely bleak to me. And last year they had the third most injured team on offense. But what they're bringing back, you're entering the season. This is what they're entering the season with right now. They have a bottom 5 situation at quarterback. They have a bottom 5 offensive line. They have a bottom 5 wide receiver core. And it seems obviously very apparent that Jacoby Brissett's going to start the season and kind of go through that tough stretch before we may see a change to Drake May. Brissett's a clear leader. I think he's a good bridge guy. I think they did a nice job selecting him to be the guy to transition to Drake May. But, we look at this offensive line. Cole Strange is likely going to be out the first half of the season recovering from an injury. They lost left tackle Trent Brown to the Bengals in the offseason. There's a chance either rookie could start here in Caden Wallace or Layden Robinson, with Caden Wallace already getting first-team reps at left tackle. The 2 O-linemen who've held up best in camp versus a very good defensive line is Sidney So and Michael Onwenu. So can the offensive line can it get into the top 20? I personally don't think so. It just needs to not be a bottom 2 or 3. Though for the weapons, you mentioned it. The rookie wide receivers are showing out. New England desperately needs either Jalen Polk or Javon Baker to have an immediate positive impact for this first-team offense. Otherwise, this wide receiver group is lacking here because both of those guys have had good camps, and that's saying something against a secondary with some significant talent on it. But Kendrick Bourne coming off the injury. We love Demario Pop Douglas. They got Ty Thornton, KJ Osborne. You mentioned Juju's probably on his way out. Love Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper at tight end. I think that's a solid pairing for a team that's going to need to have a lot of checkdowns to get the ball out quick with a O-line as porous as what they have. The running back situation is like, Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson. It's okay. Gibson really got pushed out to the side in Washington for Brian Robinson, who, while he runs hard, isn't a top-tier guy at that position. So, obviously, when we're talking about a team with a win total as low as New England's, everything's got to be taken into, effect of what we're talking about here. They're going to be a bad offense. It's just, are they going to be a bottom 3 offense, or maybe can they be offense 25? That's going to determine where the ceiling is for this offense. Alex Van Pelt, Interesting hire. You mentioned it. Seems to be split reviews on him. But again, the offense can really only go one way from last year.
Yeah, you have an adult in the room at quarterback in Jacoby Brissett, and he did have a pretty nice burst there in Cleveland with Alex Van Pelt there. Mac Jones just wasn't really playable, specifically with Bill O'Brien calling the shots there last year. But as we transition here to the defensive side of the ball, it really becomes an interesting unit, and I think having a large enough sample size is a beautiful thing, and I think that helps us understand specifically with New England now that Brady was more responsible than Belichick for winning. We know Belichick's roster management was horrific, especially the last half decade. We know Belichick bringing back coaching retreads because they were yes men failed miserably. But we also know with 100% certainty that Belichick was, is, and will continue being a defensive genius even from his eventual grave. If you look at last year, the magic Belichick pulled defensively was nothing short of amazing. 9th in schedule-adjusted efficiency, 7th in down-to-down success. Situationally, the Patriots finished top 8 in both red zone and third down defense. And this is all while having the most injured defense in the NFL and playing an above-average schedule of offenses. Gerard Mayo, large shoes to fill, and unfortunately, there's some questions in the front seven. Christian Barmore is out indefinitely after being diagnosed with a blood clot issue. He was elite last season, finished 3rd in run-stop percentage among all defensive linemen, 10th in pass rush win rate. You start to look on down the line. Matthew Judon returns from a season-ending knee tear. He's in search of a new deal. That situation has progressed a little bit better in recent days, but he's not quite happy there. And, you know, as we talk about this, we forecast the Patriots defense this season to face a little bit of a tougher schedule. So as we kind of project ahead, Billy, tell me how you're handling the change from Belichick to Mayo and any other key factors that you're thinking about here for the Patriots defense.
I think Belichick to Mayo has to be a downgrade. I don't care if people thought Belichick lost his fastball overall in head coaching and managing a team. He is, without a doubt, one of the best defensive coaches of all time. You mentioned the magic he worked last year. Just think about last year's team, where they finished, how many games they were behind in, and opponents were still could not run the football against them. They were number 1 in rush defensive efficiency and number 2 in explosive run defense. And that's being behind all game, where your opponent's just trying to run the clock in the fourth quarter. They still couldn't do it. So, you know, they also had poor luck last year on the defensive side. They recovered the second fewest percentage of fumbles, and the opponent field goal kickers made the highest percentage of their kicks against New England. So Belichick did work magic last year. It's a downgrade. How big is it? He's from the Belichick tree. I think he can still get a decent amount out of this group, but it's not a good sign when you and the star defensive end are arguing mid-practice like he was with Matthew Judon. You mentioned the Barmore injury. He, to me, is the highest-graded player on this team from my perspective. So you're losing your best player. We don't know how long. It certainly seems like he's not going to be there for the beginning of the year with the potential that he's not going to play at all this year. I do love the secondary group, and I think they're going to have a chance to keep New England plenty of games as long as the health stays good. Christian Gonzalez looked like an absolute star before his injury last year, while Jonathan Jones and Marcus Jones are both solid at outside cornerback, number 2 and slot cornerback. I think you could do a lot worse than with Kyle Duggars and Julie Peppers in the safety role, and Marte Mupu would be a decent rotational piece to fill in if there was an injury there. It's just the strength of schedule is going to go up. What are they going to do when once again it seems like the offense is probably going to be struggling? There's probably going to be a decent amount of 3 and outs. Can this defense hold up over the course of a 17-game season? They did it for Belichick. I don't know if you saw this. There's an interesting article that came out about whether or not Jared Mayo is actually a player's coach or not, or is this just Bill Belichick all over again in a different form? So that is concerning to me from the personnel perspective of will these guys, especially some of these veterans, they're watching the way Judon is handling this contract situation. He seems very unhappy. He's also a leader on that team. If he goes throughout this season unhappy and this team starts off really poor, will that kind of negative energy continue to work its way through the locker room? That's something that I'm thinking about as I'm analyzing New England, because obviously I don't think they're going to be good. I was part of the under 5.5 group there. I don't see this defense being better than it was last year.
Yeah, I think we feel the same way there. And I saw a quote from Keon White, and he said, we're not getting cussed out every single play.
Yes.
But Gerard Mayo coaches is up pretty tough as well. And I think where we land on the Patriots defense is this isn't the most talented defense, right? Barmore, Gonzalez, and Judon were the exception. Maybe Keon White propels himself into that conversation this season with an expanded role. But that first three is extremely talented. And for now, Barmore is out. Judon isn't happy. Yes, all signs point to Christian Gonzalez returning to form, but he is coming back from an ACL tear. So when we think about the dip in game planning and in-game adjustments from Belichick to Mayo, it's the key reason I know we're projecting a decline in efficiency this season, because coaching mattered more to New England's defense than just about any other unit, right? This isn't Nick Saban changing defensive coordinators at Alabama's peak, but the new guy has nothing but blue chip kids, right? And so that's how I'm thinking about this. Mayo and DeMarcus Covington aren't getting any help year one, as we keep mentioning the schedule. We're projecting a top 5 slate of offenses New England has to face. And when you think about a new regime in any sport, gaining the trust of the players is vital. And winning early, I think, helps achieve that trust a little bit quicker. But you look at the Patriots, they have the toughest schedule in football the first 8 weeks. And it's not just opponent-driven. You look at the travel situation, it is horrific over that early season stretch as well. Short week game in New York on a Thursday night for a first-time head coach. You have the trip across the country to San Francisco, a trip to London against Jacksonville without a bye afterwards. You really start to see why pro bettors took a stance on the Patriots this season, going under 5.5 wins. At 4.7, feels a little dicey at this point, in my opinion. Would you agree there, Billy?
I would. It wouldn't surprise me to see just a touch more. Let's say they come out in the preseason and the offense is looking a little rough. I could see people going in and maybe this closes 4.5 flat. There's not much wiggle room here. I mean, definitely we talked about it. We would never advocate playing a number that's moved this much. It would still be under pass for me. I mean, they're currently underdogs in all 17 games. So they would have to overperform the market at this juncture in 5 of those games to go over the 4.5. But it's 4.7 feels just about around the right number. But it wouldn't surprise me to see some 4.5 at plus 130, plus 125 get taken again. It just wouldn't be as big as obviously that 5.5 position was very large. And I think looking back 2 months, if you could say 2 months ago, everyone could have the glasses to go on and look back 2 months ago, what positions would you want to be holding? I think the 5.5 would be at the top of the list.
And our loyal listeners should be holding that position. It was interesting to see, at least in the preseason market, the Patriots caught some massive steam a few days ago, so something to monitor as the preseason moves forward.
Joe Milton, baby. Joe Milton. Yeah. Come on. Hey, QB1. QB1 I'm here.
I don't know about that, but he does have a cannon that everyone seems
Everyone loves the big arm.
Yeah. So, we transition a little bit here to the division disruptor, we'll call him, this offseason. Professional money has poured in on Aaron Rodgers and the Jets, opened 3-1 to win the AFC East, and as I mentioned earlier in the show, now a plus 180 co-favorite with the Buffalo Bills at multiple shops. The Jets' win total opened as low as 8.5. We're out to a consensus 9.7. Caesars is actually dangling a 10. And here's the reality. Robert Saleh, I thought, did the Lord's work propelling the Jets to 7 wins in 2023 after Aaron Rodgers' season ended on 1 pass attempt. Injuries continued to mount offensively, and the Jets finished dead last, 32nd in EPA per play, success rate, passing efficiency on third downs, and in the red zone. Rodgers returns. The offensive line is completely rebuilt, with Joe Douglas trading for veterans Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses, in addition to signing John Simpson from Baltimore. You have the 14th overall pick, Elijah Vera Tucker, claiming to feel great. The poor kid Last 24 months have been hell, tearing his triceps, ACL, and Achilles. You have the second-round pick, Joe Tippmann. Should see his game improve with competence around him. Breece Hall poised for a monster season. He's 23 months removed from a multi-ligament knee tear. You bring in the big-bodied Mike Williams. He gets added to the receiver rooms, I think, in hopes to remove some defensive focus away from Garrett Wilson. Billy, we know the Jets' offense can only go in one direction after finishing dead last in so many key areas. We know there's been professional support for the Jets, but there's camp reports surfacing about the offense struggling to find rhythm, and Aaron Rodgers is growing frustrated. How do you envision the offense looking with Nathaniel Hackett, and maybe shed some light on areas that give you both confidence and concern with this Jets offense?
So, spot on with the camp reports. I think the snap issue, again, we have another team, Joe Tippmann snaps are still, as late as last night I was reading, they're still having issues getting the snap down. And Rodgers says he likes it between his midsection and the number on his jersey, and they're coming in low. They snapped one over his head. It was 20-yard loss in practice. I don't, when you're in camp and you're going up against an elite defense, which is what the Jets have, and you're struggling early in camp, who cares? That's going to happen. You're trying to figure it out. The defense has been together for all these years. Obviously, there's going to be some struggles. The offensive line had 9 different combos last year that played in at least 5% of their snaps, which was most in the NFL. You mentioned at the end of the season, 30th in pass block win rate, 29th in run block win rate. They brought in Tyron Smith. Obviously, Elijah Verituk has got to stay healthy. They drafted Olu Vashanu out of Penn State. He's going to help with the depth here. The offensive line can only get better. The quarterback play can only get better. I think Garrett Wilson is obviously a stud. Rodgers has talked about it. He reminds him of another Devontae Adams. I think if he stays healthy, we could see him have a season where he gets 1,250 plus in yardage. Mike Williams, interesting. He's got good upside, but can he stay healthy? He's off an ACL tear. He's on average missed over 3.5 games per season for the last 7 years. They brought in Malachi Corley, who is not ready to be the starting slot wide receiver. He's still focusing on perfecting his route running. And then Xavier Gipson is currently dealing with a leg injury, so they haven't really been able to get that slot work. We've seen Alan Lazard get a lot of raves out of camp, which is good, and that's what you want. He had a tough year last year. Rodgers seems to love having Tyler Conklin as a little check down, his safety net in the middle of the field. That's someone to maybe look to on a week-to-week basis in terms of prop numbers, depending on the defense and what their defense is going to give the Jets, or if there's a lot of pressure coming, from a certain defense that week. Tyler Conklin seems to be the guy that Rodgers is focusing on when he needs to get the ball out of his arms. Downsides here. Can Rodgers stay healthy? Can the O-line stay healthy? This is the New York Jets. Something always seems to go wrong. Haven't even mentioned Breece Hall yet. And I think Breece Hall is another guy. I think they have potential superstars in Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, but something always seems to go wrong. Now, you can't go into as a professional bettor, or even really as a bettor, and just go, the Jets 10 wins. How? Something always goes wrong with this team, even though it feels like the Chargers of the past couple of years, where it seems like there's sharp money and then catastrophe happens every single year. I think Robert Saleh gets a little bit of a bad. I don't want to say that he's a great coach. I just think what he's done with what he's had in the offensive end has not been as bad as people are suggesting. He's managed to keep this defense playing engaged throughout the season, but when it comes to the offense, it's going to come down to the offensive line, Payne. Rodgers does not like people in his face. He's obviously going to lose a little bit mobility from his previous seasons. If the O-line can be average, I think this offense is going to be very good.
Yeah, I think the 30-second thought process, if you're buying the Jets this season, is simple, right? The offense only needs to be average. Yep. Just raise the floor because what's on the other side of the ball, and I think it's a Super Bowl caliber defense, and we can be a little quicker with Robert Saleh's defense because there's only going to be varying degrees of damn good. Finished third in early down defense as well as third in overall schedule adjusted efficiency despite facing tons of snaps and being put in horrific positions by the offense. C.J. Mosley played over 1,100 snaps. Quincy Williams, Jordan Whitehead, and Sauce Gardner all played over 1,000 snaps last season. The schedule of offenses the Jets face this season is certainly more difficult. We're projecting top 5, in fact. The big free agent addition defensively was Hassan Reddick via trade. He's still holding out for a new deal. Javon Kinlaw has been wildly disappointing through 4 seasons, but did show an ability to get after the quarterback last year. What stands out about the Jets' defense for the season ahead?
I think you mentioned it. It's only varying degrees of how good this defense is going to be. The only question I really have entering the season is how good the health has been over the past 2 years. So they have so much upside, and obviously they're playing hard through these bad offensive performances. The trio of cornerbacks is probably the best in the league on any team, with Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed, and Michael Carter in the slot. But those guys only missed a total of 5 games in the past 2 years. So if there's any injury regression in the secondary, what's that going to look like? I'm a little concerned, just a little bit, about the safety position. Chuck Clark's coming off an ACL tear. He didn't play at all last year. Tony Adams showed well last year, but he's only got 16 career starts. If the secondary cornerback unit can stay healthy, I think the safeties are fine because they take all the pressure off the safeties. If we start to see the Jets, if you tell me 2024, 2025 season's over and the Jets defense finished 20th to 25th in overall health, we're going to see a step back. We're just going to, whether it comes from the defensive line or whether it comes from the secondary. They're curious and kind of wondering what they're going to get out of Will McDonald. He seems to have interesting reviews at defensive end. One day it's great, one day it's not great. Michael Clemens was getting the looks that they thought they were going to be giving to Will McDonald in the past couple practices. Obviously, your guy out of Florida State, Jermaine Johnson, had a step-up year last year, but they got to get Hassan Reddick in camp. They lost Bryce Huff. Bryce Huff we think very, very highly of. The thought was Reddick's going to come in and more than replace that production from Huff, but he's got to get there. And I think they're going to figure it out. The schedule's difficult, but the Jets defense should still be a top 8 unit at worst, unless obviously there's catastrophe with injuries.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting part of the defense is you lose Bryce Huff, a guy that we thought much higher of than the market, and just came out last year and had a monster season, 67 pressures, 10 sacks on just 334 pass rush snaps. And you're like, hey, we're going to replace him with Hassan Reddick, but Hassan Reddick is a no-show at this point. So I think from a market perspective, though, let's maybe hit on that before we put a bow tie on the Jets. We're not discussing the Jets as an 8.5 win team anymore, right? That would certainly be a buy. It's trending towards 10, and so I think the conversation changes a little bit. And that, for me, it's like the Jets have an extremely high floor type team. I think the question is the ceiling. The last time Aaron Rodgers was healthy was 2022. Not a great year. 20th among 33 qualifying quarterbacks running the same offense that Jordan Love excelled in from Thanksgiving onwards in terms of EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. On paper, the offensive line looks fantastic, right? But we know age in both directions and injury can be an issue. Tyron Smith turns 34. Morgan Moses is 33 and a half when the season starts. You mentioned Joe Tippmann having shotgun snap issues in camp heading into year 2. John Simpson, for me, has only been a replacement level guard all 4 seasons in Baltimore. So this feels like an offense, because of the O-line, that could have some drastic week-to-week recalibration, so to speak, right? If there's a week where Tyron and Vera Tucker are out, the downgrade is significant. You mentioned Fashanu, maybe he's the great depth piece there as the third guy. But are you thinking more about the Jets as a high floor team as opposed to being a true contender?
No, I'm actually. I think, yeah. Do I think of them as a high floor team? Yes, but I think they're a true contender. And I've had conversations with guys I work with who disagree, who think Rodgers is probably significantly past his prime, and we're going to see that this year. But I mean, we got to look at this schedule, Payne. It's a chaotic time schedule. They play 6 primetime games in 11 weeks, which is the most of any team during that span. But it grades out as the 4th easiest schedule overall. And if you're going to buy the Jets, you want to buy them. You want to buy them early. I'm not saying I would. I mean, personally for myself, weeks 1 through 5 are the easiest in the NFL for the Jets. But they open the Monday night at San Francisco. So my plan as a professional bettor is I'm going to wait. If they beat San Francisco, good for the Jets. Maybe I missed a buy on them. If they lose to San Francisco, there might be an opportunity to buy in on the Jets there. That's a very tough
not to
spot.
cut you off, you're thinking more a payout on the high ceiling after the potential week 1 loss.
Correct.
You're thinking more futures market as opposed to maybe a updated win total, so to speak. So you want to capture the highest end of the peak if everything clicks and we get that rejuvenated Aaron Rodgers who looks like he's in his prime again.
Yes. I think the Jets, if you took the Jets they took the jerseys off of the players and you didn't see New York Jets there, they would be priced a little bit differently. I think I'm not saying it's a suppressed price, but I do think that there's always this thought that something's going to go wrong. But man, if you look at this defensive team, is this the best defense in the league? It's certainly one of the top 3. So you're talking about a top 3 defense. You're talking about a guy who clearly still has the arm strength at quarterback, and now he's in his 18th or 19th year. He's got all this wisdom and experience playing the position. They got an elite wide receiver. They have an elite running back, and the offensive line should be average if it stays healthy. That, to me, on top of that, playing the 4th easiest schedule in the league, that, to me, would lend itself towards why isn't this total a little bit higher? But I think that there's thoughts that, look, things can go off the rails in New York, and if Rodgers misses some time, what's it look like? If the defense has some injuries, what's it look like? But you mentioned it, this is a high-floor team. If that defense is average health at best, they're going to keep New York in every single game. I did like your point about the offense, so I could see week-to-week basis as we see different levels of performance. I don't think the Jets are going to come out and, oh my gosh, they're going to be like the Dolphins where they're going to be lighting it up no matter who they're playing. I think it's going to be very situation dependent.
The last 2 teams we've talked about with the Patriots and the Jets, they've dealt with injuries last season and for multiple years, specifically the Jets. We know football is an attrition sport, and so we bring back a gentleman whose business is injuries. The good Doc Deepak talks all things AFC injuries.
Are you injured or are you hurt?
When injuries occur in the NFL, you need someone to call on.
If you're hurt, you can still play. If you're injured, you can't.
Let's check in with Dr. Deepak Chona, Stanford and Harvard-trained orthopedic sports surgeon and founder of Sports Med Analytics, the industry leader in data-driven injury analysis.
So are you hurt or are you injured?
All right, what is up? So today talking AFC East injury, and you can't talk that division without talking Aaron Rodgers. So Rodgers will be a full 12 months out by week 1 from his Achilles. Given that he throws right-handed, and this is coming off his left Achilles, that is mechanically more favorable than the opposite scenario, i.e. Kirk Cousins. Rodgers' scrambling numbers have been declining since 2020. We'd certainly expect that trend to continue. There are some question marks on the Jets' O-line, and combine that with Rodgers, what will likely be decreasing tolerance for pressure, leads us to expect them to focus on the short, quick passing game. And we don't see any reason why Rodgers, especially with his elite arm strength, wouldn't have the potential to excel there. And one other point in predicting his 2024, his actual 2022 is worth noting as well. Now, he had fractured his thumb that year, week 5, and that would have shut many quarterbacks down for surgery. He played through, but his passing numbers dipped, probably because he couldn't really grip the ball with full strength. And then that season, he had a week 12 rib contusion, typically causes a 2 to 3 week dip for quarterbacks as well. So together, you may be able to explain with injury his 2022 drop off from back-to-back MVP to 26th in the league in QBR that year. So 2 years later, what does all of this mean? We'd say really a potentially very strong showing from Rodgers, assuming he can stay upright. And then his teammate, Breece Hall, is worth noting that he had, over the last 5 games of the season, 130 total yards per game and had 3 touchdowns in that stretch as well. Now, Breece Hall if you look at his data, the last about third of the season is when he projected to hit his 90%, according to our data coming off an ACL. And this season, he projects to be back to 100%. The second year for young players when they really return to full explosiveness. So we would expect more of what you saw in the strong showing late part of the season last year from Breece Hall. Then another ACL tear, Mike Williams, who just signed there. Now the data and the comments both suggest a week return is very reasonable. The downside here is that wide receivers age 29 and up, which Mike Williams qualifies for, do tend to see a performance dip upon their return. And that projects to last until at least about week 10 or 12, where you still have a notable performance dip. So not necessarily expecting the elite performances from Mike Williams here. Then we move to the Dolphins. Now, Odell Beckham Jr. started with being sidelined, and the comments luckily suggest a minor injury. It's not a red flag, but he's got an extensive history, and there's definitely a yellow here because we often hear players and coaches say minor injury at this time without much detail, and it's a little unclear what that really means in his case. Then on the defensive side of the Dolphins, starting with Jalen Phillips, he had an Achilles tear in November. Week 1 would be within the timeline that's been done in recent years, and that compares to Cam Akers and Shaquille Barrett, for example. But the key thing to keep in mind here is that pass rusher performance takes a huge hit the first year back. And Phillips does project to regain his explosiveness around mid-year 2. But this year, especially with the accelerated timeline, really strongly recommend tempering expectations for Jalen Phillips. He's recently introduced lateral movements, but hasn't really returned to full practice yet. What that probably means is he needs about 4 weeks or so to get from introducing lateral movements to being ready to compete against others in contact. And we would expect him probably to start the season on the PUP and miss the first few games. But with that being said, it's a little bit of a rough timeline. If we had to look at the data, the most likely outcome is approximately week 6 return. Then we have Bradley Chubb. He had an ACL tear, and unfortunately this happened in January, so he really didn't have any part of the season to start recovering early. And that means that his timeline for week 1 is only about a 9-month timeline. Now that is pretty aggressive in terms of returning a defensive end or a pass rusher to this level of play off an ACL. So we wouldn't necessarily expect to see Bradley Chubb out there, probably looking at those first 4 weeks as the initial target pending his progress. Then on the Patriots, we got unfortunate news about Christian Barmore. He was diagnosed with blood clots. Now this is a pretty serious condition potentially, and the severity depends on the size of the blood clot and also the location. Sometimes these require medications like blood thinners, and that could cost a player a year or even more in some cases. NBA fans may remember Chris Bosh, who missed quite a bit of time with these. So big time variability to the effect that this diagnosis can have, but a very serious diagnosis nonetheless. And then Kendrick Bourne, wide receiver for the Patriots, coming off a week 8 ACL tear, not back in the practice field yet, but it does sound like something that is likely to happen in the relatively near future. Kendrick Bourne, it wouldn't be surprising to see him miss the first few games as well on the PUP, but mid-season return, week 6 to 8, is when we'd start to really expect Kendrick Bourne to be getting closer to full workloads. Then we have on the Bills, Chase Claypool and Dawson Knox, a pair of pass catchers for Josh Allen, but both dealing with what are being termed day-to-day injuries. First, Chase Claypool has a toe injury. From those watching at practice, when he came up with this, he was limping. He did strongly favor the other foot, and that does not bode great, but these tend not to carry a long-term risk into the season. And what we mean by that is that if Chase Claypool is back to practice without a designation by about the preseason work week 3, then typically it wouldn't carry any further risk going into the season. Dawson Knox, a little bit of the same story, although he's reportedly dealing with a groin strain. We just don't know how severe it is. He was initially listed as being managed, and that's why he wasn't in practice. But then it came out that he was dealing with this groin. So if he returns on the relatively soon side, then we can confirm a low severity and low chance of this acting up on him in season. But short of that, we have to kind of keep an eye on this one. And that's all we got for the AFC East. So until next time.
Some really great intel from Deepak there, and we're going to backload the show with information. I believe another first in Bet the Board history is about to happen here, Billy, where I'm the one asking the pro bettor where he's taking our loyal listenership for a plus EV investment. What are you thinking here?
Hey, don't sell yourself short. You know I'm always asking you what you think about every bet before I'm placing it here. So I think we're in agreement here. We're going to go outside of the division. We're going to look in the NFC South at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. There is some minus 130 out there currently in the market on an alternate total of under 8.5 wins. That number is good to minus 155, which is widely available no matter where you look. I think when we talk about Tampa Bay, I think a lot of positive variance went their way, especially in the quarterback position last year. Baker Mayfield's early down to late down splits were incredible. He was top 10 on third down. He was a miracle man on third and fourth. And they didn't really do much to improve the roster. They won the division, so they're going to play the toughest schedule for the division. We look at what happened with the cornerback play last year. It was pretty poor play, and they lost Carlton Davis. There's a chance that if the young guys in that cornerback group don't step up, it could be a bad unit again. I think when we look at the wide receiver weapons, the guys are just getting older. We're not seeing an influx of new young talent for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We're seeing them look at what happened last year and go, okay, that's just going to repeat again. Evans and Godwin are going to be great. Evans is going to put up his 10th or 11th straight 1,000-yard season. No worries about it. We've also seen Payne, when Dave Canales leaves a quarterback, he tends to take a back step. And I'm not saying Dave Canales is the greatest offensive mind in the league. He certainly isn't. But he does have a good way with quarterbacks. Liam Combs comes in from Kentucky. We'll see how this works with Baker Mayfield. But looking at the schedule as well, I think that they have a tough spot here where they're going to be facing 4 division favorites in a row from Week 7 to Week 11. They played Baltimore, Atlanta, Kansas City, and San Francisco. So even though the schedule is a top 10 ease of schedule, they're going to have some tough marks in there. I think we're going to see some positive regression fade for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this year. I think Carolina's better than last year. I know Atlanta's going to be better than last year. And then we look at the Saints, kind of up in the air of what we're going to get from them. But to me, Tampa Bay is a clear team that's going to regress this year. So let's go under 8.5 at an alternate win total. There's minus 130 out there. It's good to minus 155.
I like that. And I think what's really interesting there and maybe a lesson to learn and use for other bets down the road, right? You're starting to kind of put puzzle pieces together. And you mentioned Dave Canales. We don't know what he's going to be as a head coach. But you think 2 years back to Seattle, Geno Smith comes out of nowhere and has his best season as a pro. It happens again a year ago with Baker Mayfield. And now he moves on to Carolina, and we've seen professional bettors go over 4.5 wins on Carolina. You talk about some of the regression coming for Baker Mayfield, not just on third down, but also in terms of turnover-worthy plays. Had 24 a season ago and only was picked off 10 times. So you would expect that number to heighten a little bit. I really like going the alternative win total route there. So I'm stamping this one. I approve this one. I really like it. It's a bet we'll go and make later this afternoon. Billy, anything else on your mind? Whether it's the AFC East, whether it's doing a show with me. Hopefully I wasn't terrible in the host chair. Also, I think worth mentioning once again, because we are at the best bet portion of the show, you will be joining us every single Monday. Everything I know about you and have studied and researched and back-tested is you are the prop guy, and you have a ton of props, and I know our loyal listeners on Monday nights don't love that we don't always have a best bet for Monday Night Football. We understand it's the bailout game, but we also have a responsibility, and we are not going to give out information that we don't bet ourselves. And over the years, that has certainly hindered some of the listenership. But you're a guy who paints the board with props, so sounds like you'll be joining us on Mondays and giving our listeners a little taste of some goods for Monday Night Football each and every single week.
Absolutely, man. And again, I'm extremely grateful to you and Todd for giving me a platform here and allowing me to talk football. And props are the biggest part of the portfolio. There is not a Monday Night Football game that we don't have some action in terms of props. There's a lot of offerings out there. So I would say to listenership, make sure that you have as many books as possible as you're heading into the 2024-2025 NFL season. It's very important to price shop, especially with props. They are priced differently across all the books, but those are the biggest edges. Payne, you talked about the route to becoming a professional bettor, and a lot of guys I know, and I'm sure you know, is they start and they stay in the prop market as long as they can before they have to graduate to betting day of game limits where, you know, your edges get cut in half, but you can get down 10 to 20 times the amount of money. So we're still in that prop phase where we're able to get down what we can get down. We're very happy with it, and it's the focus of mine every NFL season to crush on NFL props. So that's the plan.
Something for our loyal listeners to look forward to each and every single Monday in season. Billy, appreciate you picking up the slack and joining us this week. For our listeners, we're back Thursday with another NFL preview. Until then,
we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Furman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.